You want to hear a cool story? Okay, I'll tell you. And I promise it'll eventually connect back to the main focus of this video, which is the global trends in biodiversity loss and mass extinction. Yeah, we're well on our way to Mordor now, friends. Strap in, but don't panic. We will eventually make it back to the Shire in later videos. Back when I was living in Los Angeles, just getting into stunts, I was invited to a Halloween party on this cruise ship that was parked in a harbor. One of the guys in our group was dressed in full military gear and even had a fake M16 machine gun. It looked pretty realistic, except for the signature orange plug in the end of the barrel. After some time, we noticed we were by a window and could open it and see the crowd of people down on the dock waiting to get on the boat. I had the bright idea of borrowing the M16 and pointing it out the window at the crowd to scare them, since it's Halloween and all. Admittedly, not one of my brightest moments, which I blame on Dionysus, the god of wine. Minutes later, we got a knock on the door, and it was this large buff guy, not in costume, with a serious look on his face. He was an undercover police officer who basically delivered a message that sobered us right up. Apparently, while I was having my fun aiming the toy gun at the crowd, they had snipers with real guns, with their sights aimed at me. Most likely, my life was spared by the little orange piece of plastic in the end of that toy gun. This is an instance when I didn't realize the significance of the decision I was making at the time. If I'd known in advance that my little joke could have been the end for me, and caused a lot of suffering for my friends and family, I don't think I would have made that choice. In other words, I misjudged the importance of that decision. I thought it was down here in importance, just a playful moment, when in reality, it was up here, as possibly one of the times I've been closest to death. In order to better discern what decisions are important, it's helpful to have some landmarks along a spectrum of significance. At the bottom of the scale are decisions that only affect a few people in a minor way, such as what color shirt I choose to wear. Somewhere in the middle range are decisions that ordinary people will dedicate their lives to, such as raising a child. And at the top of the scale are decisions that affect huge groups of people in profound ways, including future generations and other species. When I was told about the snipers, it was like a sudden bonk on my head that changed my perception of the significance of the situation. I felt a similar bonk that shifted my perspective as I was researching the trends in biodiversity loss and mass extinction in more depth. Decisions that I once considered fairly mundane turned out to have some incredible ramifications. While extinction is a normal and natural part of the process of evolution, the current rate of species extinction is 100 to 1,000 times higher than the natural background rate. To put that into perspective, that's at least 25 times faster than the mass extinction event that killed off the dinosaurs around 65 million years ago. This time around, the driving cause of this sixth mass extinction is a single species of primate, and our activities like farming, logging, fishing, mining, and burning fossil fuels that are altering the natural world at a rate unprecedented in geologic history. Our activities have reduced the biomass of wild mammals to 1/6 their original amount. That's 80% of mammals gone because of us. And we've reduced the global plant biomass by half. At the same time, humans and our livestock have been increasing, and now outweigh wild mammals and birds by a factor of 10.
Many people imagine there's this untouched wilderness because they see it on their TV screens. But the reality is, there's really not a lot of wild left out there.
We've converted 75% of the land that is not covered by ice.
A lot of it just to feed one species.
Most of the things that we actually use are produced abroad in countries where the laws can be non-existent. So we're simply moving our footprint on destroying nature to another country.
It's not always directly apparent, but our lives totally depend on biodiversity. Wetlands purify drinking water, and the mangrove forests and coral reefs along the coasts decrease the risk of flooding for hundreds of millions of people. And 75% of our food crops depend on wild pollinating insects, whose numbers and diversity are in decline. Our lives depend on this thin layer of complex biology on the surface of the Earth for oxygen, soil, nutrients, water purification, pollination, and more. This living community took millions of years to evolve, grow, and establish into its present complex and diverse forms, and is irreplaceable once lost. Even crop diversity is under threat. In 1903, farmers had access to hundreds of varieties of each crop, like cabbage, tomatoes, peas, and cucumbers. Since then, we've lost 93% of these varieties, and now only have a couple dozen varieties of each crop, largely due to the commodification of seeds and the consolidation of seed companies. Once a species or variety is lost, there's no way to get it back. New varieties must be carefully and slowly bred, which can take years or even decades. With fewer varieties of these staple crops to fall back on, our food system is at greater risk from plant diseases and increasingly unpredictable weather due to climate change. Climate change is another major factor driving these mass die-offs. While it's true that energy sources like solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries produce and store energy with fewer greenhouse gas emissions, implementing them at the scale needed to continue current energy use would do massive harm to wildlife habitat and biodiversity. The surface mining operations that make most forms of renewable energy possible involve stripping off the ancient heritage of life on the surface to get at the rocks beneath. Not to mention the massive regions of land that would need to be developed for renewable energy generation. Sure, mining companies might claim to restore the forest through replanting afterwards, but a tree plantation on a moonscape has vastly less biodiversity than a millennia-old forest ecosystem. In the process of trying to stop climate change by building renewable energy infrastructure, we'll have strip-mined enormous regions of the biological life support system to feed the mineral needs of that process. Most renewable energy is not actually renewable. At best, it's rebuildable. And at the wrong scale, it just shifts the damage from the atmosphere to the biosphere and a little bit further into the future. One time I had this nightmare metaphor of being so hungry that I couldn't stop slicing off chunks of my own flesh and eating them. It might appease the hunger temporarily, but it's clearly a horror of misperception to continue this pattern of self-consumption that our society has resorted to in its hunger for more and more energy and stuff. Since the 1970s, there's been a 75% decline in flying insect populations. What eats insects? Birds, whose total population in North America has declined by almost a third since the 1970s. These mass die-offs are one of those domino effects currently cascading up the food chain. Who's next? The blue whale? The sea turtle? The rhino? What is the value of a rhino? Is their value merely based on how useful they are to us humans? Is it simply the dollar amount that can be earned by selling its horn, its meat, its bones? That may be if we just look at them as inanimate objects, independent from the web of life and meaning, which tends to be how the economy views and values all things. What if we saw them and valued them instead like our siblings or cousins? I mean, we've shared this earth with rhinos for millennia. Our ancestors grew up together on the African plains. They're basically our family. And yet now, the quenchless mouth of ever-expanding human industry and progress threatens many of these family members, and possibly even ourselves in the process. We're not some special exalted species to whom the rules of nature don't apply. 99% of species to ever live are extinct now. Failed experiments at adaptation to an unforgiving reality. This is not a practice run. This is as real as it gets. If we fall off this bandwagon, there's no do-over. It's lights out. End of the human story. Forever. Now, you might be feeling a sense of dread or general anxiety. That's because I meant to tell the story in a way that can trigger your physiological survival instinct. My intention isn't to trick you into feeling something that's not real. That would be propaganda. This instinctual fear can be used as a tool to help us respond with appropriate seriousness and urgency to a real threat that our normal threat reaction systems aren't tuned for. So, some creative storytelling can help properly orient our response to this long-term, slow-motion threat that would otherwise go unfelt and only be processed intellectually. On the topic of storytelling, there are a number of popular stories or narratives that are often deployed in response to existential threats like climate change and mass extinction. We use these modern myths to make sense of and contextualize what these realities mean to us.
Stories are like the format or shape that our inner maps and models of reality are built from.
One of the common narratives is the myth of perpetual progress. Basically, it's a faith that our expert scientists and engineers can invent a way out of any problem using technology and innovation.
But all are within man's power, subject to his command, in the new world of the atomic age.
Followers of this narrative usually see their life in the future as a slightly modified version of the present, except we'll be driving electric cars and using smart thermostats and having AI-controlled farm robots. Another common narrative is that humans are just a parasite on the planet.
Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet.
And we're basically doomed as a species. So might as well just party it up on our way out, and once we're gone, good riddance. Interestingly, both these narratives relieve us from taking meaningful action ourselves. So they might also be serving as a psychological tactic of denial or avoidance. But we don't believe in myths anymore, right? Aren't we a post-narrative society that makes decisions based on the relevant facts and data at hand? I wouldn't be so sure. While we tend to think most of our decisions are based on reason and carefully assessing the facts, many studies have shown that rationality usually works in service of deeper motivating forces like instinctual impulses, identity, and group kinship, rationalizing our choices and loyalties. Large media and marketing institutions fully understand and exploit the power of story to manipulate our deeper motivational systems in their propaganda and advertising.
For instance, in the 1970s, the oil industry was conducting their own internal research that was confirming the reality of climate change. And yet, they simultaneously ran marketing campaigns that undermined public trust in climate science by framing climate change as merely a risk instead of a reality.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes, but there's nothing illegal about that. We were looking out for our investments.
They also focused their messaging on personal responsibility, like measuring your carbon footprint, in order to shift the blame away from themselves. Tobacco companies used this same rhetoric, and plastics companies blamed the plastic waste problem on individual litter bugs.
Those institutions understand that people are much more motivated by these associations and narratives than by facts, numbers, and logic, and most often at an unconscious level. It's also helpful to remember that our ancestors have been telling stories for hundreds of thousands of years in order to convey knowledge and build a shared sense of direction and purpose. That's the vast majority of human history. Writing and arithmetic are very recent inventions. So whether we're consciously aware of it or not, stories play a significant role in how we orient ourselves in the world. When I was a regular competitor on Ninja Warrior, the TV production gave me the title of Legend and really laid into the drama of my epic struggle to conquer the course.
He's so accomplished, he's earned the nickname, The Legend. It is Levi Muenberg.
I knew that version of Levi was a construct to make for more entertaining TV. But many of the viewers and fans took the story seriously and would reflect it back at me in their messages of support, admiration, and expectations on my heroic conquest of the course. And, it's hard to not want to make others happy, so when I was younger, I would sometimes unconsciously fall into this narrative of athletic achievement in order to prove my self-worth to myself and to the world. Since I became more self-aware of how these stories play with our emotions and motivations, I was able to let go of that story and begin to author my own story consciously. That was a better fit for the reality of who I am. It's important to be consciously aware of the personal, societal, and even cosmic narratives we might be holding on to, and routinely question if they accurately represent reality on all these different scales.
I've also noticed that my life feels more meaningful when it fits into these larger unfolding stories in a coherent way.
It's better to acknowledge the power these stories hold over us and take ownership of this power instead of pretending like we're above them. Okay, I've painted a picture or constructed a narrative about the mass extinction event taking place at the global scale and some of its causes. And I anchored that story to reality with scientific research and data. So then, what does it all mean to me in my personal life, in my personal narrative? How can I bring this knowledge to bear in every one of my daily decisions, big or small? Well, I've found that in order to care about something, I have to know it and appreciate it first. So taking the time to enjoy, explore, and educate yourself about the wildlife around where you live is a great first step. I've included more practical steps in the description below, such as eating less processed foods, less meat, buying from small local farms, planting native plants into lawns and landscapes, practicing seed saving, and getting engaged in local politics, especially when new developments are being proposed. One of the takeaways here is to get beyond climate change myopia and start to understand the bigger ecological crisis that's taking place. Thinking back to that spectrum of significance, the significance of this ecological crisis is well beyond the scale of things that ordinary people will often dedicate their lives to. So why does the slightest inconvenience to address it, like going for a bike ride or separating my trash from recycling, feel like so much effort? So it's clear there's something broken in our culture there. I suppose that's something that I'm struggling to address in myself in all my musings and stories here. So let me know if any of it's clicking for you. That's why I think that developing a historical perspective and taking the long view is critical. We're living in an extreme period of human history, even if it doesn't feel that way. The things that we value and prioritize today are likely to seem very warped and delusional to those living many generations in the future in the wake of these extreme times. These realities should force us to do some real honest soul searching in order to get our priorities straightened out. What truly matters most? What's worth saving? And what excess can we relinquish? As we continue making decisions that will affect the future in profound ways, there's no plastic orange plug in the end of the toy gun to save us from our bad decisions this time. So it's critical that we fully integrate the significance of these global trends into our collective map-making and collective decision-making now. But also, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are no perfect solutions to this. It's not a problem to be solved, but a predicament to be navigated. I don't know what the answers to mass extinction and climate change are. And even the solutions I'm promoting often feel so small and superficial, sort of like trying to hold back the tide with your hands. So, I don't know, maybe hope is overrated. Maybe what we need is courage, not hope. Courage is the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. So thank you for having some courage to stare into the abyss with me today. Thank you for caring. It matters. P.S. This stuff can be a lot to deal with psychologically, so it's important to be mindful of your mental health. If you're feeling crushed by the gravity of it all, I'd suggest going for a walk, or writing in a journal, or talking to a close friend about it. And if it's affecting your daily life in a negative way, then it's good to seek professional help. Eco-anxiety is a real thing that some clinical therapists are trained to help with now.